Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Kylie Stam, and I serve as the Diversity Program Manager for the Elliott School of International Affairs. Thank you so much for joining us today as part of Inclusive Excellence Week. I'm really excited to get this session going and introduce you to these wonderful colleagues that you see on the screen. Just a couple of logistics. This is a webinar, so we won't be able to see you, but if you have questions throughout the session that you'd like our incredible panel to answer, you can submit them using the Q&A feature. I'd also like to take a moment to share our land acknowledgement. We appreciate alongside the community members at the AT&T Center for Indigenous Politics and Policy that UW resides on the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Piscataway and Anacostan peoples who have served as stewards of the region for generations. Even though we're calling in virtually, we recognize that when we do get to gather in person, that is the land our institution resides upon. Thank you so much for being part of this session today, navigating institutional resources to support students with the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Community Engagement. I'm going to turn it over to Jackie to introduce herself and the team, and I'll stop sharing my screen so you can see all of our wonderful panelists.
Thank you, Kylie. Hi, everyone. My name is Jackie Baños, and I use the pronoun she, her. And I am a presidential fellow working in the Office for Diversity, Equity, and Community Engagement. And so I'll talk a little bit about ODCE. Within ODCE, we have Disability Support Services, the Center for Civic Engagement and Public Service, the MSSC, and Title IX. And we a lot of our central programming is really focused on educational opportunities for not just students, but also staff and faculty and other GW partners. So we help, we put on the Diversity Summit, the Race in America lecture series, which was last night, and also facilitate unconscious bias workshops, but can also provide panels, kind of like this one, that really help people learn more about the things that we have to offer, help people learn about the different initiatives we have for creating a more inclusive GW. And I'm trying to think what else. I apologize, I'm blanking a little bit, but we also partner with the Office for Advocacy and Support, the Student Rights and Responsibilities, and things like that. A lot of the events that happen on campus, like King Week or the GW Votes Initiative. So a lot of different things across the spectrum. Mr. Tapscott, if you'd like to add on, I don't know if I'm missing a couple things.
No, you're hitting all the big stuff. That's the way to go. The other thing I would just to back up Jackie is to let you all know that we report to the Office of the Provost. We report to the Vice Provost for Diversity, Equity, and Community Engagement in Carolyn LaGuerre Brown, and are jointly led our Associate Vice Provost, Helen Kennedy Salmi, and on Jackie Baños' side, the Director of Diversity, Education, and Programs, Dr. Jordan West. My name is Mike Tapscott. I'm Director of the Multicultural Student Services Center. I'm closing out my 18th year here at GW and take great pride in long service here. We are in, I think, our third or fourth iteration in terms of organizational structures. We have reported to the Dean of Students at student activities, student life, and also reported to the Provost during that time. Each of those was strategic and beneficial in its own ways. We have been with the Provost for the last 7 years. Just to give you a real quick update or introduction, I'm a DC native, which I also take great pride in. My primary identity is dad. My pronouns are the he series, he, him, his. And I take great pride in working with a wonderful group of people to impact campus and campus life with an emphasis on underrepresented communities. We unabashedly declare that as a focal point for our work. The benefit is that anything we do in the diversity circles has an impact on all students. Ultimately, our goal is to improve the cultural intelligence of every student that experiences GW. And our hope is that people become stronger and better equipped to manage life in an increasingly complex and increasingly diverse world. So that's a little bit about the Multicultural Center. We'll talk a little bit more about programs, but I want to let everybody else have an opportunity to introduce themselves. So shall I pass it on, Kylie, to Brother Timothy Kane?
Hey, thanks, Mike. Hi, everyone. My name is Timothy Kane. I use the pronouns he, him, and his. I'm the Associate Director at the MSSC, and I have a couple of sort of areas of focus within MSSC. I direct the LGBTQIA Resource Center, which stands for Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender, Queer, Intersex, and Asexual Plus Center. And so in that capacity, I work with the student orgs that are focused on sexual and gender identities. We have, when we're on campus, we have a physical space, a resource center in the MSSC. We've been there for a number of years, and it's been a really wonderful collaboration and sort of meeting at the intersection of lots of different identities. So we have racial identities, ethnic identities, political identities, religious, spiritual, belief identities, all along with sexual and gender identities. So we really do our very best to try to recognize and celebrate those intersections. That's kind of the hallmark of MSSC in sort of our values and our operations. On the other hand, I also work with religious life, which is kind of a interesting combo and intersection. People are like, what, that's crazy. You do the gay stuff, you do the religious stuff. How's it even possible? And I haven't really met, I don't think I've ever met anyone else in the country doing both of those jobs at a university. So I feel really honored and fortunate. In the capacity of working with religious life, I work with our campus community partners. So I work with Hillel, I work with the Newman Center, I work with the Muslim Student Association, and then all the other student orgs that focus on religion, faith, and belief identities. One of the leaders in that arena is the Interfaith Council, and they have worked tirelessly, even this year with sort of virtual constraints. They've done a really great job. They've also worked hand in hand with MSSC, and Mr. Tapscott has really dedicated resources of the MSSC to the interfaith, interbelief, so including secular students, community by having, we have a interfaith prayer and meditation room actually in the MSSC, which is a sacred space for prayer and meditation. And then the other sort of main area that I work on is workshops. So we partner with student affairs around the ELS workshops. And so we've done a series of workshops this year and in past years on a number of topics on sort of bridge building across identities, on multiculturalism in the United States, on different identity privileges and how to be allies with and for other communities that I might not belong to, unconscious bias, microaggressions, things like that. So we are here to serve you. We are here to collaborate with all of our wonderful campus partners, and thanks for having us. So I guess I'll pass it over, since I was talking about LGBTQIA themes. How about Lauren Crisp, who is our wonderful graduate assistant in the LGBTQIA Resource Center. Lauren, are you there?
Yeah, hi. So I'm Lauren. I use she, her, or they, them pronouns. I'm a second-year graduate student with the Women, Gender, and Sexualities program. I work at the LGBTQIA Resource Center with Timothy. So in another time when we're all in person, I'm usually in the physical resource center itself with, we usually have a small team of undergrad students and we put together programming and educational events and sort of things of that nature, as well as trying to cultivate this space that has a lot of like physical resources in it as well. I believe that's all. I can pass it to Cassandra now.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cassandra Allen. I currently serve as one of the graduate program coordinators, very similar to Lauren. I specifically assist with our Black and Latinx community. So my big times of year are normally Black Heritage Celebration and helping out with Latinx Heritage Celebration. And so really just assisting a lot of different communities to get the programming out that they need and helping student orgs make sure that they get the resources that they also need from the university. And I'll pass it to Renee, sorry.
Lauren, you can go a second time. No, hi guys, I'm Renee. I use the pronoun she, her. I'm also a second year master's student in the Elliott School and within the MSSC. I also am a graduate program coordinator for what I like to call the Pan Asian community. So I work with those of South Asian and Asian and Pacific Islander identities. So my role comprises at least 30 different student orgs and several campus partners. And we have just a lot of programming going on right now with Asian and Pacific Islander Heritage Celebration, which everyone should check out. So that's what I will currently have the most knowledge on. And I'm really excited to be here. Thanks.
Wonderful. It's so great to meet all of you. I'm meeting some of you for the first time. I blame COVID for that, but we really appreciate you being here today. So we've got a couple of questions, some more about the resources, expanding on the resources a little bit, and then some about advice and recommendations. We've got mostly faculty and staff on the call now. And so I wanted to start, I know something that comes up a lot is questions in our community about bias incidents. And so I wondered if anyone could speak to the bias incident reporting process, what to do if someone witnesses a bias incident or experiences one. And oftentimes we get questions about what happens after, and if there's any themes, you know, that folks know and can name as folks are learning more about the current climate on campus. So I know that was like multiple questions, but we get a lot of questions on that area.
Sure, I'm happy to talk a little. Oh, yeah, I'll start, and then Mr. Tapscott, if I miss anything, let me know. But yeah, so on our website, diversity.gw.edu, there is a space at the top to report a bias-related act, and really, it doesn't have to be like super like outright whatever ism you want to add or say. It could, if it's something that is making a student or someone feel uncomfortable, we encourage that it is reported, and it's a pretty like comprehensive form. And what will happen after it is submitted is that you'll get follow-up from someone within ODECE, and just to learn more about the incident. And you can also choose to remain anonymous, which I think is important as well. And there really isn't like anything too big or too small to report through that portal. And really what ends up happening really depends on the situation, and how there was harm, or how people might feel, or how the person might feel about it. So it really depends. It's a case by case kind of thing, but we really do, we get reports almost every day, especially now people are a little bit more like aware about things that feel like they should be reported through there. And it really is like, to speak a little bit about like the themes, it really varies. People will reference, like microaggressions or more like outright, things that come up. So yeah, it really depends, and I can't really say that there is just like one theme, but it really is responses, or like the outcome is based on like a case by case basis, and then we'll work with the people involved to best address it and make sure that everyone is like heard and acknowledged. I don't know if I'm missing something else, but Mr. T, feel free to jump in.
Sure, just to cover, you've hit everything in the major points. I just want to share a couple of philosophical pieces. Bias reporting systems are fairly common and fairly standard in universities nowadays. They're important for a couple of reasons. One, obviously, it's to give people a resource to go to and a way of building or connecting people who are struggling. The other thing that's really important is that it allows the university to generate data around incidents across the campus. And so, as Jackie said, there's nothing too small or nothing too large that this particular resource cannot handle. The important thing is that if you feel hesitation, we encourage people to report anyway. It may not be big enough to act upon, but each entry creates a record that we might refer back to at a later date regarding of a person, a staff member, a faculty member, a student, or an organization. What we're seeing most commonly nowadays is online bullying inside and outside of class. Also, the Asian Pacific Island community in particular has expressed a number of concerns about treatment. And one of the challenges we've heard recently is just the notion that the university is moving without necessarily having the kinds of conversations they need to have. And Renee may want to address a little bit more of that or related things in particular. And I'll just close my part of this by saying that the bias reporting system has been in place about 3 years now. We had another system that we used prior to that, but the important thing again is about creating records. The other thing is that there are a list of resource people with various strengths and backgrounds and resources around every aspect of diversity and inclusion you could imagine. And when a report comes in, the leadership of ODECE will review the case and then determine which resources to tap into to help solve the problem. The immediate resources is the ODECE senior staff, and that includes Carolyn McGurr-Brown, who's also an attorney, Helen Kennedy-Salney, who has 35 years of experience here at GW, Amy Cohen, who runs the Nashman Center for Community Service and Public Engagement, Asha Reynolds, who is our Title IX, Director of Title IX and Sexual Assault Services, and then Dr. Maggie Phillips, who runs Disability Support Services. I also serve on that committee of folks, and each of us has a history and an expertise that we can bring to the equation to help solve problems. Renee, was there anything else that you wanted to share about the APIA community or the South Asian community related to that, or other things you wanted to share specifically? Ongoing challenges, et cetera?
Yeah, I don't have much to share, but I did want to say, as a staff member and as someone who attended the university 4 years for my undergrad, I noticed that there was always a lot of hesitancy to submit forms like this, whether it's related to the bias incident reporting or Title IX. And I do think that it's important for staff and faculty of the university to always take the initiative to reach out to their students or to err on the side of reporting. I think that's very important, especially when groups or individuals feel as if they're not getting the support or they're not in a space that's cultivating their full potential for growth and their ability to thrive. I think it's important for those who do feel more comfortable in those spaces to help with advocating and amplifying those voices. Um, so just making sure you're reaching out to students and other staff and faculty members, even just a quick check-in is really important, to speak to them about their experiences before you try to advocate for them. I think that's also really important.
Wonderful.
Last thing I'll mention too is that one of the things about the system is that it is mindful around policy around mandatory reporters. And if you have any questions about being a mandatory reporter, this is also a great place to have that conversation, to start that conversation.
Wonderful. So I wanted to encourage, I see there's already questions coming in and others can submit them as well. We'll turn over to that in a moment. I had a couple more questions. One thing that you all talked about, intentionally or not, in introductions, almost everyone mentioned the physical space. And as someone who knows very deeply the impact of physical space in terms of community building, and I know that's the center of the work that you all do, how have you, I guess, continued to stay connected with the communities that you work most closely with, and continue to build community over the last year? And I ask that because a lot of times that's a theme that comes up within our own school as well. You know, we're trying to build community and create spaces, and in particular for folks with a lot of the underrepresented identities that you all have spoken to, as well as a larger community. So, and I'm really thinking about the present moment and all of the current events that add social pressures and political pressures and just some of the different things that our students are navigating all at once while also being away from the physical space and community. So what have you all done? What advice do you have for our faculty and staff?
I don't mind kind of starting this off. I think something that has gone a long way, not only for me as a staff member, but even as a student, is people saying that they understand that you don't want to meet today, or like saying that, you know, I don't really have much to say other than 2 sentences, and to get on an entire Zoom call and turn on my camera and say those 2 sentences is a bit excessive sometimes. So I've definitely found that when I'm interacting with my students, when it came to planning some of our events, literally I would wake up to, okay, our meeting that's supposed to be in 2 hours is canceled now. And instead of being a little bit more harsh about it, or kind of saying, and like, you know, like we have these physical events that we're planning that we're trying to get done, being a little bit more lenient, I think has gone a very, very long way. When it comes to planning a lot of our events, timeline is just so important. Making sure rooms are booked, making sure that it's marketed appropriately, making sure that, you know, all the signage is in all the proper places. But I really will say, over this past year, the leniency that has occurred is unlike anything I've ever dealt with. You know, submitting marketing materials a week before the event is like unheard of if we were having a physical event. But because people can just click on a link and join, I think it did take a lot of pressure off of our students. It takes a lot of pressure off of you when, you know, you have to be in class every week and your professor tells you, you know, it's okay to not have your camera on today. So I think that is, leniency has become so, so important. It creates a safe space without even having to physically be in a space. And it allows the opportunity for not only just event planning, but also just for conversation to be had, and kind of let people know, hey, I know last time we canceled this meeting. What has been going on since then? Are you okay? And I found that to be really, really important, not only for the work that we do, but even as a student, when professors extend that olive branch to me as well.
I can jump in really quickly. One of the other things that I find very helpful is almost some of the more casual conversations we're having with folks. Mr. Tapscott is really, really wonderful and persistent at inviting people to be in a conversation. So we have a cohort of student employees that support virtually now the outreach of MSSC. And so, you know, when I've been on some of those calls, honestly, just sort of checking in with folks and just sort of, you know, kind of almost joking with them, or like, wow, you know, is that your dog in the background? And just sort of chatting with them about their lives, and having them smile and having them sort of chuckle, and remembering that, you know, we have the high tech, high touch. The high touch is lost. And so in our conversations, we really try to do a virtual high touch in terms of just, you know, asking people how they are, asking people about their specifics, you know, like what's going on, how's the weather? I mean, it might sound kind of trite, but it really starts opening things up in a really wonderful way. And I've been really amazed at some of the conversations, and the students always crack me up. I mean, they're, you know, just listening to their stories and listening to, you know, what happened over spring break, or, yeah, you know, my dog is here, but he wasn't here and now he's here again, and all these different things that come up. So just kind of remembering the high touch around the people that we're working with, more than just the objectives that we have for getting work done. For me, that's been very, very helpful.
I was going to weigh in with a couple of things. I think that what we've tried to do is to duplicate not only our practices, but our principles as an office. One of the things that you'll find about the Multicultural Student Services Center in particular, and ODECE in general, but I think a real strength of ours, if you've ever watched our graduation celebration, it's a marching hug. It's a real sense of relationalism and family and connectedness on a very, very personal level, to the comfort of people that we're involved in. Again, knowing that different people have different tolerances for handshakes, hugs, dap, and so forth. For those of you who know dap, it's just the Obama handshake with the extra grip. So we really work hard at retaining our values around how we treat students, how we affirm and support them. I've always been a believer in that, and this is a quote that the staff just loves, but I'll condense it. If you're trying to grow a lettuce and the lettuce does not grow, You do not blame the lettuce. You provide more sun, more light, or more fertilizer, but you never blame the lettuce. This is the way I can see everybody laughing now. This is the way that I've always believed we treat and support and develop students, and with the belief that they can all be successful with the right circumstances around them. And our job, I believe, is to create those resources. The other thing I think is really important is to be really serious and focused about what you do. So when you're having a Zoom meeting or connection, stay focused and fill in gaps with something creative and fun. If you hear this, this is the Jeopardy theme. And whenever I'm meeting with students and there's a quiet moment when people don't want to respond, I'll usually play this. It gets a little bit of a laugh, and then we mosey on. The other thing we do is constant communication. We have a weekly newsletter as well as sub-newsletters to specialized communities and specialized groups. To give you a sense of the volume of that, if you look at all the email addresses we've sent to and all the emails we've sent those messages to, in the past year, we have sent 1.1 million emails to the 30 some odd thousand constituents that we're attached to. Of that group, 425,000 of them have been opened and we hope read. So that sort of constant weekly outreach helps us. And then within that, as people respond, we do specialized communications as programming dictates or as need dictates. For example, working with the Asian Pacific Islander community recently, I know that Renee has been in constant touch with the student organization leaders and the response to the challenges they've expressed, which is the university's not doing anything, we don't feel supported, people are making decisions without conversations. That's really important. And what I appreciate about all of our graduate coordinators is their capacity to stay connected with the young people that we're here to support and nurture. Oftentimes, I will send a periodic communication until things resolved. I've tried to do something each week in our newsletter for the API community, just to let them know that we're focused, we care, and that they matter to us. So those are just some of the things I think we try to do. And if anybody else wants to weigh in, please do.
I'll quickly add, I'm sorry, I know there are more questions, but to like Cassandra's point earlier, and what people have already said, it's really important for like staff and faculty to understand how students are experiencing the moment that we're in, especially with like racial violence, and those things are very real. And I think speaking as like a graduate student myself and reflecting on my undergraduate experience, when professors would take time to say like, let's just talk if you want to about what's happening. And I think that helps provide really important perspective. And like from ODCE, and we often provide like community spaces for like processing and healing, and or just like other conversational kinds of spaces. And sometimes they're open just to students because they need that space. But when they're open to staff and faculty, I would really encourage you to just listen, and you can learn a lot about how to, make your space more inclusive, or make your be more like focused in your approach and building community. Yeah, I think that's pretty much what I wanted to say. So just listening and being aware of what is going on with students.
Jackie, I'm so grateful you raised that. That touches on the next question I was going to ask. And so I don't know if anyone else wants to build on that, but a lot of times what questions we do get are from folks who are not necessarily part of a particular community, who may be impacted by something that's happening at a, institutionally, the campus climate, national level. There's a lot going on right now in this moment, and some folks feel more connected to how that may impact communities, whether that's racial injustice, whether that's violence against particular communities, legislation impacting particular communities, things that are very salient to folks in particular communities that others may miss. And a lot of times folks will ask, how can I support X population better? Or I don't know as much about a particular community. And a lot of times want to learn and want to make space. So I think, Jackie, you touched on a wonderful example. I don't know if there's anything else folks would add as our faculty and staff continue to try to make spaces more inclusive and create spaces of, I guess, recognition for the current moment oftentimes and what our students may be navigating in addition to being a student.
I'd like to weigh in really quickly just about the notion of being hyper aware of your station in life and your experience. One of the great things about the Multicultural Student Services Center is that it's a daily learning laboratory around difference and identity and inclusion. Throughout the course of a single day, we might have every imaginable identity on campus walk through and engage somebody in that building. And what it does is help us build a series of experiences that allows for the natural connection to people despite differences. As an older citizen, for example, I lose track sometimes at the language and the vocabulary of students. But the key thing that I try to do is to listen and engage them around that language. I try to, with humor and humility, use that language, much to the chagrin of most of the people on this page. But I think that conscious effort to realize that how you frame your experience in life may be much narrower than the community you're addressing. And so we have to approach difference and identity with the understanding that you may not have been there. And almost everybody responds to interest and inquiry when there are challenges around. I'm the first to tell young people that I don't always get the lingo, but I try. And then I try to also share with them that the majority of their vocabulary actually came from reconfigured language from the 60s and 70s. So I'm just saying, which we used to say. Anyway, but I think that's a really important piece of understanding. If you, the assumption that your socioeconomic status or the assumption that your access is universal is something we all do as human beings. For example, when we talked about one of the grad coordinators mentioned something about student resources. One of the great things about our experience is that we'll hear more from the students who live in a 8-story walk up in the Bronx, who have to use a bootleg Wi-Fi signal to do some of their work. The assumption for all of us is that everybody has Wi-Fi. The reality is everybody doesn't. And so many decisions that we make are built around socioeconomic expectations. The easy pass lanes, you must have a credit card. You must have a credit card with X number of dollars in balance. You must have a credit card that's accessible and not necessarily a debit card. These are decisions that impact all of us, but oftentimes disconnect some of us. So we have to look at our lives as very complex, but we also have to recognize that everything that we think about that's a norm for us may not be a norm for the people we serve. Then you multiply that times identity and socioeconomic status, et cetera. It becomes a very complex thing, but the awareness is critical.
Kylie, I wanted to jump in also and just build a little bit on what Mike just said. We all recognize that any institution, and maybe more at GW, we get into these silos about my work and their work and students' work and my space and this and that. And I think we have a tendency to do that also with diversity, equity, and inclusion, or especially diversity around, we think of identities as these separate monoliths sometimes. And so what we try to do at MSSC is, again, I just want to sort of reiterate the point of intersectionality, that we might say, oh, I want to support this particular identity, and we might say, the folks that fit into this identity, and yet, we fit into multiple identities. So for me as a gay Catholic, it seems like, for whatever, the powers that be want to pit one identity, my Catholic identity, against my gay identity. And that's really what we work very hard to discourage at MSSC, that we have to recognize that it's not an either or, it's a, basically it's an we're together in this with all of our identities. We bring all of the identities that we have into the room. And as Mr. Tapscott said, there was a question about inclusion in the classroom. Remembering that you might have, let's say, a white student who's socially, economically in a poorer class. And so they might struggle with paying for extra resources that are required by the professor. And so you might look at someone and say, well, they're in this category of whatever race or ethnicity, so I don't assume that they're in that category. So what we really try to do at MSSC is remember and actually celebrate the fact that we're, as Mike said, we're complex people. We're amazing people that have all these different identities. And it's not so easy to remember that, but not siloing us into, oh, Timothy's the gay guy. Oh, Timothy's the Catholic guy. Well, actually, I'm both of those guys. And so we have that and more when we engage with students, and they do too. And so that's a really wonderful reminder for all of us to just celebrate the complexity of all of who we are.
I would just like to add, I think it's very important, especially for faculty and staff, to be honest with students and to allow students to be honest with them. And I say that in the regard in the fact of, yes, we work on behalf of GW, but when students come to us to vent about how they feel, this X, Y, and Z professor said this X, Y, and Z comment that's in regard to the greater things that are happening in society, even if that student is speaking out of anger, just giving them that space to be honest is so, so important. And it honestly gives you the opportunity as well to correct them. So a really good example of this is, I think we are all aware of some of the backlash that occurred after President LeBlanc misspoke on a couple of things. Some students were very, very angry. It was very important to let them say their piece, to say that what they thought, but then to go back, and not only as a staff member, but just as someone who knows that the president is very good at his job and is very well intentioned, to go back and tell them, I recognize what you said, I understand your anger, but let's also recognize that the president is doing his job to the best of his ability. These are the other things that you do not see working, because I think especially for GW students, we do our best to be as involved as in as many things as possible. And we kind of think that the side of the story that we know is the only side of the story. But I think our job as staff and faculty is also to make sure that we don't expose students to everything that's happening at the university, not because we're trying to hide anything, but because they should be focusing on getting their education. And so they may not be aware that there are these other committees that are working on fixing things that are issues at GW. There are students who may be very angry at what the Marvin Center is named, but they may not be aware that there's a whole committee focused on naming at the university. And so instead of shutting them down and always trying to operate from a lens of, well, I'm an employee of GW and GW is the best employer of the world, no one's saying it's not, but giving them the space to share that with you, but then correct them and tell them that GW is working to be better every single day, just like we as individuals are working to be better every single day. And so I recognize your anger. I give you space for your anger to share that with you. But at the same time, GW is working very, very hard to make itself better. There are entities like the MSSC and ODECE that exist to work and make it better. And what you can do as a student is not only be angry, but work with us, help us make this place better for you. Because I think when we put up that wall and that fence, that GW is a perfect place, it makes it hard for students to be receptive that we're open to change, because we are. And we see our institution change every single year. We see our institution get better every single year, but it only gets better when we allow the students to critique us and we give them that feedback back as well, that we are working and that there are things happening that they may not see every single day, but it's happening. And there are committees and there are people like us who they may not be interacting with, but understand that we have our jobs and we're doing these things because we're hoping that the outer works that you see, like this event, like this discussion here, are had and they end up being played out with our faculty and staff. And so it's really important for us to be honest with them that we're changing just like we are as individuals, and allow them to be angry, but also allow ourselves to correct them and let them know that we are all people just trying to work and be better.
That's a hard one to follow, but I just wanted to add a little tack. That was powerful. I got goosebumps there. Thank you, Cassandra. The other thing I want to share is just the notion of equity in the classroom. Going back to the dreaded lettuce quote, we always feel that from a position of not equality, but equity, that we are accountable and responsible for the success of every student we engage. And oftentimes that means making a significant sacrifice sometimes. But I just want to remind everyone that there's some identity, there's some background, there's some image in each person in your class that may be the only one represented in the space. I think back to my son who was a rower here at GW, probably the second Black rower in the history of GW's sports programs. He was never treated unfairly, but he was never fully supported specifically because of his needs around being recognized. If you walk down the hallway in the sports, and again, I have a very close relationship with the athletic department, but you walk down the hallway and you look at the lack of diversity in the team pictures, once you get past 2 or 3 sports, it's shocking. And so we always try to encourage every faculty member and every staff member to be mindful of the person who is alone, whose identity is not represented, and to provide as much equitable treatment and support for them, but just be mindful of doing, again, nobody asks anyone to do anything anything more than they can do. But there's a certain mindfulness and awareness you can have to people who are significantly underrepresented in a space, to affirm and support them, and to just take a little bit of additional interest and focus on their success in the face of the additional challenge that most people don't recognize. If you're the only Black staff person in a meeting, if you're the only Black athlete in a program, somebody has to say and you might call it a systemic inequity, but the reality is somebody's got to address that. And our hope is that our faculty and our staff will lead the way in that regard.
And if I may briefly add one more thing, you also mentioned faculty and staff recognizing identities that they may not identify with personally or may not be a part of a community. I think a really great example and a really important thing to do, as Mr. Tapscott said about being mindful, is I know silence sounds very hard, but sometimes just being in a room and just being silent and receptive goes so far. So a really great example of this is, as Renee mentioned, she oversees our APIA and our SHC communities and committees. We recently had an event with the Bengali Student Association. And personally, I have never heard Bangla music, never heard of it, I'm sure it existed and all these things existed. But for me, just being in that room and instead of inserting myself and telling everyone, hey, I never heard of this music before, like, tell me what he's actually saying. Like, can you actually translate the words for me? And instead of asserting the fact that I don't know things on this community, I was just silent. The only question I think I asked was, can you share your Spotify playlist with me? And I think when you give people the space to share their community without inundating them with a ton of questions, because sometimes when you inundate communities that you're not familiar with a ton of questions, you're taking away from them enjoying an event. They've bought a speaker or a presenter that they're really interested in seeing. And meanwhile, this is an opportunity for them to share that part of their lives with us. When we inundate them with questions, it takes away from their ability to sometimes enjoy it, because now they're focused on trying to include you in the conversation. And so while I'm saying it's okay to ask questions, I think it's important to be mindful of how many questions you're asking, or even taking the time yourself to do the research to see that information, then go back later and find someone who was at that event and say, hey, so after your event, I went and I did some research, and I would love if you could tell me a little bit more about this. Because you really have to recognize when these students, especially our student organizations, are putting on these events for us, they're trying to enjoy their event as well. And even though they're trying to share and educate, they want to enjoy the hard work and the fruits of their labor. And so sometimes doing that little extra work and kind of silencing yourself a little bit, asking a few questions here and there so you can do the proper research, and then going back to them later and letting them know, hey, I came to your event. It was a great event. Can you tell me a little bit more? So to be very quite honest with you, the past week I've been listening to Bangla music and I have no idea what he is saying. I have zero idea. But at the same time, I haven't ran to Renee or someone in BSA yet to ask them, hey, can you translate this for me? But if I ever get to that point, I will definitely make sure I do such. But to make sure you're not doing it at that event, meanwhile they're trying to enjoy, it really makes them say, hey, I do remember you being there, and I remember seeing your name, and I remember that you weren't forcing questions down my, down my throat and in my face, asking me all these things that are, second nature to me, but you came back later. So I think your silence and being mindful that you are kind of the oddball out in that community, but you're also the oddball out because you're trying to learn more, it goes so far. Being silent sometimes doesn't seem like it'll go very far, but it does, because when a student sees your name over and over and over again, and then all of a sudden they see you in person, the first thing that they say to themselves is, you know what, I did see that you attended my events, and I did see your name, and I did see that you asked a question here or there. You've been very supportive, and then you can really open up more conversation.
I appreciate all of these responses, and community building takes a lot of purpose and intention, and I think you all modeled that really well. We've got a couple minutes left. I know we've touched on some of these threads, but I wanted to ask one of the questions that came in, just in case anyone wanted to address it more specifically. It's about language. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the language of inclusion and how you describe your work. I know there's a lot of words that we use in diversity, equity, inclusion, things that folks have shared. And this question is I'm asking because I work on inclusive teaching, but struggle with whether that's the best term to describe the work. We want students to feel welcome and included in their courses, but inclusion can be complicated because what are we including people in? Does inclusion evade some of the important work of changing the institution, fighting white supremacy, et cetera?
I could jump in just for, Mike, go ahead. Well, I think that, I think it was, sorry, now the question's off. Sorry, who asked the question? Who asked the question? It was
Daphna.
Daphna, I think you're right on target when you talk about welcoming as another sort of a term or an idea around inclusion. For me, when I walk into a new space, let's say I'm walking into your class, I immediately, it's almost like a first impression. What I guess in the first 7 seconds, we make our first impression, and it's like this indelible ink that's like in my brain when I think about, people that I interact with. So I think that, we all know when we feel welcomed, and there's all these intangibles that happen. So I think your struggle around, or your question around terminology, I think is an important one, but I wouldn't get bogged down with it. I think more the high touch around how do you feel, when do you feel welcomed? What do people do to help you feel welcomed? Some of the promising practices that we talk about at MSSC, there's been a little bit of debate about this, but I think offering pronouns, so that making sure that like if I offer my pronouns, that we don't misgender someone by using the wrong pronouns for them in the classroom. Hopefully they have their preferred name in GWeb, and so that you get that on your roster. Making sure that religious accommodations are honored. I know that there's an expanded list of religious holidays at GW. And again, just being aware of our unconscious biases, all the blind spots that we have that might have us stumble into microaggressions in the classroom is really important. And I think the issue that Mr. Tascott brought up about social economic status differences, people come from lots of different places, and to assume that everyone can afford X amount of books that are super expensive, or an additional software that is needed for a certain class, that's a little tricky. So it sounds like you're really right on target, and I wouldn't get so concerned. I know that we're the academy when we sort of parse words, but feeling welcomed, I think you're right on target with that.
And I support that absolutely. One of the things I've struggled with diversity and inclusion is the development of a very, very complex vocabulary. And it is new to many of us who work and practice in the field. It is challenging to keep up with. Much like the lingo or the language of young people, the language and the subculture of diversity and inclusion is challenging. And I have tried to be moderate and mindful because I think one of the biggest problems we have in this country is that as we organize and as we create groups around ideologies, we often take the next big step, which is to create the vocabulary of that discipline. And then with that vocabulary, we use it. Sometimes we even hammer with it. And the reality is that people that don't know it, understand it, or can adapt to it then feel not included and not connected. One of our biggest issues in our national politics is the millions and millions of Americans of no specific political persuasion who do not understand the language of the modern day as other millions of Americans understand. And so I'm always conscious of trying to be very careful about how language trends through time. And for me, it's the principles. One thing we all understand are the principles that most of us were raised with, whether we were raised in this country or in other places throughout the world. Uh, Making people feel safe, making people feel welcomed, inclusive, welcome, similarities, um, and being mindful of the fact that sometimes language can be weaponized simply by its use. So for me, I try to be really conscious of, um, the audience I'm speaking to and their capacity around the language of the construct I'm working in.
Thank you so much. That's actually all we have time for. So thank you. I could talk to y'all forever. I know everybody could, but we really appreciate your time so much. And I'll share with our attendees how to get in touch with each of you, if that's okay. And I just want to say thank you for the great work that you all do. And I know I learned from you and the intentionality that you put behind everything that you do daily. So thank you for being in community with us and for sharing your time with us today.
It's our pleasure. And one thing I'll just close with on our end is that working with these young people, including Timothy in that category, is one of the great joys of my life and 44 years of university work. Jackie, Cassandra, Renee, Lauren, and Timothy. It makes for an amazing environment. And I just encourage faculty staff, come visit us. A number of staffers literally come and have lunch with students. Dean Petty brings a box of cookies every Friday. Pick a day, bring something once we get back face to face. But it's all about community and it's all about family. And those things matter for the lifelong relationship we have with each and every one of the students who starts this institution. We should make sure they also finish.
I couldn't possibly say anything after that. Thanks. Thank you all so much. Have an amazing day and we'll see y'all soon.